Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining our How to Do Research and Get Published webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Mastering the Neurology Publication Journey from Submitting to Publishing Your Research. Happy to have you all. First, I'd like to introduce you to our team of presenters. Hemi Malki, PhD, is an executive editor based at Sage's London office. After obtaining her master's in science and neurobiology from the University of Helsinki and PhD in neuroscience from the University of Amsterdam, she embarked on her publishing career at Biomed Central, where she coordinated peer review across a range of clinical and life sciences titles in the BMC series portfolio, after which she worked for many years at Nature Review's Neurology. At Sage, she manages Therapeutic Advances in Neurological Disorders, a leading gold open access journal in clinical neurology, and oversees editorial operations projects across Sage's open access journals. Next, Alyssa Venezia is a publishing editor on the STM Journal's editorial team. She has been with Sage since December of 2016 and is based in Los Angeles, California. She oversees a suite of peer-reviewed journals in medical fields and is responsible for the operational oversight and strategic development of those titles. Next, Dr. George Perry is professor and SEMS Foundation Distinguished University Chair in Neurobiology at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Perry is recognized in the field of Alzheimer's disease research, particularly for his works on oxidative stress. He has been cited over 134,000 times and is recognized as an ISI highly cited researcher. Perry is founder and editor-in-chief for the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. His research is primarily focused on how Alzheimer's disease develops and the sociological consequences of the disease at a cellular physiological consequences of the disease at a cellular level. He is currently working to determine the sequence of events leading to damage caused by and the source of increased oxygen radicals. Next, Dr. Randolph J. Nudo is the University Distinguished Professor and Vice Chair of Research in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Kansas Medical Center in Kansas City, Kansas. Dr. Nudo is the editor-in-chief of Neurorehabilitation and Neural Repair at Sage, a leading journal in the field of rehabilitation, as well as deputy editor of brain stimulation at Elsevier. His studies range from fundamental questions about brain plasticity to therapeutic approaches to recovery using non-invasive brain stimulation. And last, my name is Sean Scarsbrick, a senior marketing manager on the community engagement team at Sage. My primary role is to provide support to authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process, with a particular focus on providing targeted support resources. On the screen in front of you, you're going to see the journals that each of our guest speakers represent at Sage. I'd say if any of you on the call think that this might be a good reach for your research, please do consider them for submission or potentially consider them for registering as a reviewer. Throughout today's call, please send us your questions via the Q&A box on your screen. We'll try as best as we can to address as many questions as possible live, but the questions that we don't get to, we will follow up with in a blog post. You will receive a link to that in a follow-up email after today's call. And just to situate us, I want to illustrate a typical author journey, moving from the early stages of securing funding, conducting research, all the way through peer review and publication. We cover this process today, in particular focused on how to prepare your neurology research for publication, but we have done a handful of other webinars across these topics, so do consider that watching a recording or joining a future webinar. And with that, I'm very happy to pass it over to Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa, and I'm going to be talking about how to prepare your paper for submission. So now that you've conducted your research and are ready to write your paper, there's a few things you'll want to consider. Before you start, these are some of the questions to think about. What is the purpose of your paper? Consider the key takeaways and the significance of your message. How does this research build on existing knowledge? What makes your research novel and innovative? Are you confident in the findings of your research? And what are the limitations? You'll also want to think about your target audience. Who's going to be interested? Why should they care about this paper? It's also important to consider journals that are read by your target audience when deciding where to submit. And as you start writing, you'll want to be mindful of article structure. The outline here is a generic example, but every journal has their own requirements for article structure, so be sure to read and follow the manuscript submission guidelines carefully. First thing in an article is usually the title, abstract, and keywords. Your title should be concise, descriptive, unambiguous, accurate, and reflect the precise contents of your paper. Your abstract should concisely state the purpose of your research, the major findings, and conclusions. A good title and abstract can improve the likelihood of your article being discovered and read. So you'll want to consider terms that are used frequently in your manuscript, along with potential search terms that someone would use that would lead them to your paper. And then make sure that those terms are included in the title, abstract, and keywords. It's also worth noting that the title and abstract are what's shared with potential reviewers. So if the title and abstract are easy to read and clearly outline what the manuscript is about, reviewers will be more likely to agree to review your submission and reduce the overall amount of time that you spend in peer review. Next, you'll have the introduction. This is where you will clearly state the purpose of your study and the questions that you're addressing, and also allude to the implications of your research to help capture attention. You'll want to address how your research adds to the existing literature and what that literature is. After the introduction, you'll get into the methods. So you'll try to explain your research methods while avoiding overly complex language here. Some questions to consider are: what methods and techniques did you use for your research? How many patients were included in the study? What important details will help contextualize your findings and make sure that's addressed? You'll also use tables, charts, and other graphics as relevant. These can help complicated methodology become more accessible to readers. You also want to make sure to check the journal's submission guidelines for any requirements that they have on how to present your data. The results and discussions typically follow the methods. Here you will share your results and how they answered your research questions. You also discuss how your research contributes to the existing literature and what the results mean. You can also discuss any complications or limitations. And then the conclusion. The conclusion is usually a separate section where you can explain the implications and impact of your result. As well as concluding thoughts and takeaways. You'll also want to include recommendations for future studies. You'll also want to clearly state any calls to action or implications that might be important to readers, especially practitioners or policymakers. And then lastly, we have the end statements. That's the final part of your paper. It usually contains end statements like acknowledgments, conflict of interest statements, data availability, funding, patient and participant consent, and research ethics statements. The journal submission guidelines will state which end statements a journal requires for their submissions. And when in doubt, you can always reach out to the journal's editorial team to check. And you also want to be mindful of your language as you write your paper. So here are some key recommendations to help you with writing. It's essential to use clear and simple language. Writing in the active voice helps ensure that the ideas are communicated directly and effectively. This approach also improves readability and makes the content more engaging for a broad audience. Before drafting a manuscript, authors are also encouraged to read articles from the journal they intend to submit to. This can provide insight into the journal's preferred language, tone, and terminology. It's also especially important for aligning with the expectations of both the editors and readers of that journal. If your paper includes key takeaways or recommendations, these should also be clearly highlighted. And explicitly calling out those points increases the practical impact of the work. Authors may also benefit from using professional editing or translation services, such as Sage Author Services. These services will help ensure that the manuscript meets the high quality standards for submission. You can also check whether the journal accepts submissions in other languages. Some journals may allow an abstract to be published in the author's preferred language. Finally, the use of AI tools in manuscript preparation should be approached with caution. Authors should consult the journal's specific submission guidelines as well as Sage's AI policy. And you must always disclose generative AI use in your submission. Improper use of AI tools may lead to ethical or procedural issues during the review process. So please read these policies carefully. And another thing to consider before submission is research integrity. You'll want to read and adhere to the journal's peer review and research ethics policies, which are listed on their submission guidelines. You'll also want to familiarize yourself with Sage's publication ethics and editorial policies, which include our authorship guidelines and AI policy. As noted before, some journals require end statements in your paper, and we'll ask you for that information at submission. Be sure to check the journal submission guidelines to discover what's required. For all SAGE journals, authors are required to disclose any direct or indirect conflicts of interest that relate to the submission, and that helps the editors, reviewers, and readers be able to make informed judgments about any potential bias. When papers are submitted to SAGE journals, they will also require a funding statement with the funding agency and grant numbers indicated, or you will need to confirm that no funding was received for your paper. Where relevant, you'll also want to include the name of the ethics committee or IRB that approved the study, as well as the approval code in your research ethics statement. Also worth noting that patient consent for study participation and patient consent for publishing their medical data or images are two distinct things, and you'll want to make sure your statements are clear on which of those consents you obtained. If your paper includes content that was not originally authored or created by you or your co-authors, you'll need to seek the necessary permissions to use that content in your paper, and make sure that the clear permissions are obtained before submission and included in your manuscript. You'll also want to be aware of predatory publishers and groups that will offer you publication for a fee. If you receive these queries, please verify that the person and email address are actually affiliated with the journal before proceeding with any actions. If they are asking you to pay a fee, confirm that there is indeed a fee on the journal submission guidelines. And you can reference this blog for more information on avoiding predatory publishing groups. All right, and then next we're going to talk about submitting your paper. So now that you've written your paper, you need to find the right journal. And choosing the right journal is crucial to improving your chances of your article being accepted and your research having an impact. Neurology journals cover a range of topics, subfields, and subjects within the discipline, so you'll want to consider the scope of your paper when deciding which journal is relevant. When choosing between journals, make sure to read the aims and scope of each journal. A lot of journals seem similar, but may publish completely different content or ask you to present your findings differently. You'll also want to familiarize yourself with published articles in those journals, taking note of the formatting, tone, and sections that are typically included. Journal homepages can offer a rich source of information and a glimpse into what the review and publication process for that journal would be like. This includes key metrics like citation impact, review and publication times, anonymization policies for peer review, and often the rejection rate for the journal. SAGE also has 2 free tools that you can use to help find journals to submit to. The Journal Recommender tool is a free web-based tool that allows you to input your article title and keywords, and then it will match those terms with relevant SAGE journals and give you a recommendation on where to submit. SagePath is an article transfer service where you can submit your article to SagePath, and then the service will pair your paper with a relevant journal and transfer your submission there. The main difference between the two is that you don't need to upload your submission to the Journal Recommender tool. It may also be helpful to check out SAGE's Neuroscience, Neurology, and Psychiatry Discipline Hub, which includes a list of all the journals that we publish in that discipline. Other ways you can search for journals to publish in include looking at databases like PubMed, Web of Science, Scopus, and Google Scholar Metrics. You can also reach out to your peers and supervisors for insight and advice. They may have experiences to share to help you determine where to submit. If you are looking to publish open access or your funder requires you to, you may also want to check if your institution has an open access agreement with the journal's publisher. Publishers usually have a website with these open access agreements listed, and you can check to see if your article will be made OA. All right, so now you've found the right journal to submit to, it's time to start preparing your submission. A good first stop is the journal submission guidelines. You'll want to read these carefully and pay attention to specific requirements. For example, any word limits, article structure and heading requirements, the reference style, abstract and keyword requirements, figure limits, and end statement requirements. If you do not follow the guidelines, there's a very large chance that your paper will be unsubmitted and sent back for adjustments before even being considered. You'll also want to review your paper for readability, language quality, and formatting. You can utilize language editing services if needed. Some journals will require a cover letter. If they do, that'll be stated on the submission guidelines, so be sure to include that with your manuscript files upon submission. Next, you'll want to check that you obtained permission for any copyrighted material that you're using in your article and make sure that that's acknowledged in your manuscript. You may also consider enhancing your submission with supplemental material, visual abstracts, figures, or data sharing. Many journals can host this kind of supplementary content, so think about what might add value or help readers understand your paper better. A final and important step is to make sure your paper is anonymized properly for peer review. Many journals have double anonymized peer review policies, so you need to check that all identifiable information has been removed. If you have questions about submission requirements, you can always reach out to the journal's editorial office. Now that you've finished your prep work, it's time to submit. The link to the journal's submission site is usually on their submission guidelines. Please note you can only submit your manuscript to one journal at a time. Duplicate submission is not allowed. Most Sage journals use the ScholarOne platform called SageTrack. Please know you will need to create an account for each journal you wish to submit to. We recommend that you link your ORCID and Web of Science profile as soon as you create your account so that it keeps it connected to all your current and future submissions to that journal. Once you're ready to submit, follow the steps outlined on the platform. You'll be asked to confirm all the article information, including the title, keywords, authors, affiliations, and funders. And this is also where you will upload your manuscript files. Please make sure to read all declarations and statements carefully next to the checkboxes. Please note that the boxes you tick will have important ethical ramifications. They may also involve agreeing to pay additional fees like open access fees. And now I will pass it over to Hemi to talk about peer review and production.
Thank you. Hi all, I'm Hemi and I will take you through the next steps. So what happens in peer review and what happens if you're successful and your paper gets accepted and goes to production. So now you submitted your paper and it's in peer review. How does that work? Here's a brief timeline of the peer review process from submission to decision. After a paper is submitted, it is checked for compliance with the journal guidelines for things such as correct formatting and ethics declarations and for fit with the journal's aims and scope. If it passes these checks, it is sent to peer reviewers. And in most cases, the peer reviewers are matched to a paper based on keywords provided in the paper, the keywords provided by the peer reviewer if the reviewer has created an account, or the keywords in articles that the peer reviewer has authored. It's important that you choose keywords that are most relevant to your paper to ensure that the right reviewers are matched. Reviewers are invited and given a deadline to submit their review. Reviewers can then assess the paper and prepare comments for the editor and authors and make recommendation or revision, reject, or accept to the editor. The editor then makes a final decision based on the recommendations from reviewers. Your article will not be published immediately following submission. The process can take weeks or even some months from start to finish. As you already probably know, peer review is an important part of the research ecosystem. Reading and reviewing can help you improve as an author and help you familiarize yourself with the current literature within your discipline. There are two ways you can start the journey of becoming a volunteer peer reviewer. The first is to create an account in the journal's peer review site. Use strong keywords to illustrate your research expertise. Good keywords are descriptive, but not too niche. The second way is to become a reviewer is to connect with the journal editors directly. A reviewer may consider reaching out to the editors via email, which you can find on the journal's website, or by creating a Web of Science account. It's possible that your paper gets rejected before review, also called desk rejected. And here are some common reasons why. 1. The paper is out of scope and it's not appropriate for the journal or relevant to the journal's target audience. This is why it's so crucial to read the aims and scope before submission. You may even want to reach out to the editorial team to see if your paper would be a good fit for the journal. Here are a couple of common reasons for desk rejections on our neurology journals. Some journals ask for research relevant to a global audience, so if your paper is too locally focused, it might get desk rejected. Another common reason for rejection is submitting animal or cell model research to a clinical neurology journal that only publishes human patient studies. 2. The paper does not meet submission requirements. It's really important to read the submission guidelines carefully to ensure you met all the requirements. Make sure you've included all the required sections, references, and end statements. If your paper is going through double anonymized peer review, ensure any identifiable information has been removed. 3. The paper has incorrect formatting of tables, figures of the document itself. The journal may ask you to resubmit your paper in order to meet the formatting requirements. You can easily save time by making sure that your tables and figures meet the requirements before the submission. 4. The paper was submitted as the wrong manuscript type. Several journals ask authors to choose the manuscript type at submission, so be sure that you're selecting the correct one. If you're unsure, read the submission guidelines to reach out to the editorial team. 5. The paper has language, grammar, or syntax errors that interfere with the reader's ability to understand and digest your research. Utilize editing services before submission and work to refine your language. You might also reach out to the editorial team or your institution to see if they have writing mentorship opportunities. 6. Clarity in expression and writing is really important as well. Ensure the motivation and contribution of your research to the field are crystal clear. 7. The paper might have inadequately presented methodology or data, or perhaps is unclear or confusing. Ensure your data is accurate and provide the editor with additional information to explain the data if you have concerns that the results may be misunderstood. 8. Issues with clinical trial registration, ethical approval, patient consent for participation or publication, or equator reporting guidelines are also a common reason for rejection. We strongly recommend that you check your paper for these points before submission to ensure that your paper is the highest possible quality. After peer review, not all papers will be accepted, but rejection from one journal does not need to be the end of your paper's journey. It's important to understand why your paper has been rejected from the journal. Your decision letter should include reviewer and editor feedback. Read those comments for better understanding. It could be that the reviewers were not convinced of the contribution to the knowledge base. Perhaps the methods aren't robust enough for the journal, or specific sections may be too weak. Weak methodology could be, for example, too small sample size for the results to be generalizable. Or maybe your paper wasn't focused enough, or it has other fundamental flaws. Try to take the rejection in stride. Criticisms are there to enhance your paper, not a personal critique. Focus on why the manuscript was rejected and give yourself some grace. Very few papers are accepted without rejections or revisions. Many go through one or more rounds of revisions before acceptance. You can always revise your paper to address reviewer concerns and submit it to the same or different journal in the future. If you feel that your research is sound and the findings are significant, continue working on your paper and submitting it to journals. Don't give up. How should you handle a revision decision? Read the reviewer comments and editor's letter carefully. Follow the timeframes requested. These should be included in your decision letter. Once you're ready to resubmit, clearly demonstrate what you have changed point by point. Address each referee point in a separate document, what we call author's response to decision letter. If you can't all the criticism, explain why in a positive, polite manner. Keep in mind that the process could take 2 or 3 iterations or more. What happens if after revisions your paper is accepted? Congratulations, next is the production stage. Each journal has a production editor who will coordinate with you along with your editor to publish your paper. You'll receive typeset article proofs along with the requested deadline to submit your changes by. Carefully review your proofs, including author information and statements and data presentation. After proofs are reviewed, the production team will work on the changes and eventually publish the article and assign it to an issue if the journal publishes issues. Not all journals follow an issue-based publication model, so this might not apply to you. Typically, articles are available ahead of issue publication, often called online first publication. And papers published online first are still fully citable and included in most indices. Publication is also not the end of your paper's journey, and you can help increase the impact of your research by promoting your article. You can set yourself up for success by increasing the discoverability of your paper by considering search engine optimization in your article title, abstract, or keywords. If you didn't already connect your ORCID before submission, you can still add your publications to your ORCID profile manually after signing up to your account. You may also want to include a link to your article or ORCID in your email signature or on your website or university profile. Share and discuss your research with your peers, students, supervisors, anyone in your community who might be interested in your work. You can do this online via social media or in person at conferences or on campuses. Reach out to your department for newsletter opportunities or recommend your paper for course material. Present your research in alternative formats to make it more accessible or digestible or just easier to share online. Consider infographics, visual abstracts, podcasts, and other multimedia content. You can create these yourself or enlist a paid service to produce them for you, for example, such as auto services. If you have access to Microsoft products via your university or institution, there are tons of features in Word and PowerPoint to help create exciting visuals to demonstrate your research. Consider newsletters, society listservs, or blogs. The Sage Perspectives blog focuses on distilling research papers for a general audience, so it might be a good platform for you to share a summary of your research that you can distribute to practicing clinicians and patient communities. There are lots of things you can do to promote your work. Check out the resources at the website linked at the bottom. And just as a reminder, these slides will be shared after the webinar, so you will have access to all these links.
Thank you very much, Hemi. And with that, I'm happy to pass it over to our first guest panelist, Dr. Perry, to share his insights.
Yeah, I included this first slide mainly as a space saver for SlideShare, which is where I host all of our annual reports regarding our philosophy of the journal and other things. But you can see from this slide that we've been very steady in terms of our acceptance and rejection rate. But I think it's really important to know the profile of journals. As you're submitting an article to a journal, to know its readers, its philosophy. Is it a journal that basically is the journal and are you chasing impact factor, which a lot of people are, and I'm not denigrating that because it may be very important for your career development. In the case of Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, our major goal is to encompass the field, to publish a high percentage of the articles that are available in Alzheimer's disease. This is the data to 2024. Currently, we've received over 1,000 submissions at not even the halfway point of the year, which means that we'll probably publish close to 1,000 papers this year, which means we're encompassing probably up to 10% of the field. So that's an important part. And what is it what editors are looking for? So consistently for almost 30 years, I have tried to include the full field and new ideas, and further, new regions of the world. So we've had outreach to Africa, South America, other parts of the world. China, when it was developing, we were doing extensively outreaches to it. The other part, I think, as you're developing your career, at least for myself, is to understand that you can create a body of journals that you publish your work in that reflects you, and that people know that you publish in various journals. For example, my area is biochemistry, neuropathology, pathology generally. So I published in a few of those journals that I thought represented the breadth of work, as well as some general journals like the Nature series, etc. So I didn't try to publish in every possible journal. In this particular time, I think for all journals, is a time of great change, partly brought about mostly by the movement toward open access and change in peer reviewing. The SAGE platform is a very rigorous platform uh, that, in a sense, keeps very traditional style. But what's going to happen in the future is still open to a lot of a lot of a lot of issues, particularly the change to digital data, digital photographs, digital gels, databases, and it's opened up the issue of uh, data manipulation, which is an increasing issue for authors and for editors. Sage has an incredible system for screening this in integrity office, sort of state of the art, and is playing a major role in trying to improve this. Another thing I cannot overemphasize is the importance of having proper keywords. Half the papers I receive have, it's obvious that the authors just put in the easiest keywords, which means that they're not useful for screening for reviewers. Sage's policy of using reviewers that are based on Web of Science searches, which partly are keyword generated, and authors' designation of keywords really benefits greatly when people do those designations with care. The other part that was mentioned earlier about contacting the editor, I'm contacted quite often. Is this paper within scope? Is it proper? And that depends on each editor's decision. For example, if somebody sends an article on stroke to me for the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, if it's just about stroke without cognitive loss, it's not within scope and we wouldn't consider it. But if they're studying stroke as a predictor for Alzheimer's disease, it may, and so the article can be rewritten. Also, contacting if the article is larger or not, and why Journal of Alzheimer's Disease has a sister journal, Journal of Alzheimer's Disease Reports, is that many times articles are rejected from the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, not because of quality of science, but maybe because of length. People want to publish something over 10,000 words, or I think it's a niche area, or it's a case report. So it allowed us to publish a larger variety of articles than we could accommodate in Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. But I cannot emphasize how important it is to have your own philosophy about what you're doing and accomplishment in your career. Are you publishing? Well, number one, to have a career, you need to have a body of work and having people read it, which was talking about promoting your work. But further, how will you be viewed by others? And when you publish it, the journal and you are linked. The other part about not chasing impact factors is, remember that most articles are below the impact factor of the journal. There are a few articles that are winners and then a lot of others. Your impact factor may be very different than the journal, both positive and negative. So that's where I feel it's important to know your own philosophy. So thank you. And I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nudo, can we hand it over to you now?
Yes, thank you. And I just want to follow up on what Dr. Perry has discussed about submitting your papers. And I want to start with one actually that came from the chat because I think this is a really important one and what an author does when they've had a manuscript rejected a few times and would really like to avoid that. And the reason is that if you are not selective at the outset in where you submit your journal and you get it rejected, especially after peer review a few times, you really have started to reduce the potential reviewer pool. If you're in a highly specialized area, there's a limited number of people that can review the paper. So it really is challenging then to review that paper subsequent times. And so, the best advice is to really, at the outset, do your homework on what your audience is for your particular study, and that's critical in really selecting a journal from the outset. So I want to give you a few tips for submitting that paper initially, and what we as as editors in chief were usually the first gatekeepers after the submission guidelines have been met and it's formatted correctly for the journal. We're the first gatekeepers in deciding whether a paper should be sent out for peer review. And probably the most important question that all of us ask, no matter what the journal is what's the importance of the study and what's new about it? And so it's really your job to tell us as editors what is unique about your study and how it has pushed the field forward. If we have to, if we or the reviewers have to look for that, then it's less likely that your point will be taken. And so it's one of the places you can do that, and I think that this is an underutilized part of the submission process. That traditional journals still have cover letters, and most of us as editors read those cover letters intently, and that's the first thing I look at. And that's a place where you can give the editor an overview of why this study is important to the field, why it's appropriate for your particular journal, and why and what is new about it, what has already been seen before in the literature, and what is new. And that innovation is certainly one of the things that we look at very intently. And different journals apply these rules in a slightly different way. Now, our journal, compared to the numbers that Dr. Perry showed for Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, we're maybe a bit more selective. We reject after peer review and desk rejection. We only accept about 15% of the papers that are actually submitted. And so we're a bit more selective, but that may be because of the particular niche that we're in. And we're in a neurorehabilitation, neural repair field. So there are numerous new technologies that come into this field, especially from the engineering world every day. And so we get some really great papers that have some significant findings, but the advance is actually in the engineering. It may be in some deep learning algorithm for looking at robotics after stroke, but it may or may not apply to our readership who are interested in what are the mechanisms of the recovery process. So this is really when I think it's so important when you spend years trying to get funding for a study, completing the study, writing the paper, and if you then decide very, very quickly you want to get that paper published and out the door so you have it in hand for your next grant submission, if you hurry that process, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot, and you can wind up in that situation where you keep sending it to different journals, but it's not quite the right one. Um, do your homework on the journal. Some so that is one of the most important things, is to make sure you make it very clear to the editor and in the introduction in your paper what is new and impactful about the study. That's one of our key criteria. The second tip I want to give you is that, to say this briefly, strong methods beat positive results every day. And so while if findings are significant and the methods are challenged because perhaps the study is underpowered, it's much less likely to receive good reviews. Now, when it gets down to the really methodological details, you have to understand our role as editors versus the role of reviewers. And reviewers are really advisory to us, especially about the nitty-gritty details of the methodology and how they were applied. So strong methods, even if a result is negative, that can make a very important contribution, and it's up to you to provide rigorous methods to build confidence in the findings, regardless of the outcome. So sample size is very important, and so you should think about that certainly at the onset of the design of the study, but while you're writing the paper, admitting any limitations with regard to the approaches that were used. And finally, this is one thing that usually gets criticized the most in peer review, and that is that you should not oversell your findings. And I think this is really becoming very common and widespread throughout the publishing field, and it's not specific to any journal. That and readers appreciate honesty and transparency. So if your study is exploratory, say so. If your sample size is limited, acknowledge it. If the goal is to make the findings sound important, if you try to oversell them and try to connect the dots to a clinical intervention based on a basic science result, it's going to be fraught with criticism from the reviewer's standpoint. So really know where your results lie, and you want to promote them as much as you can. Even in the discussion, you want to be able to put them in the context of what has been done in the field and how this has advanced the field. But the worst thing you can do is to try to oversell those results. And of course, the one fatal flaw from the reviewer standpoint, if you try to infer causation from association, you'll get criticized every time. But again, I think as authors, you should keep in mind that different role of the editor versus the reviewer. And reviewers sometimes send me critiques where they absolutely want to reject the paper because someone said something in the discussion that oversold the data. Well, that is something that's certainly fixable, and so you should take that with a grain of salt. And as an editor, I take those kinds of comments with a grain of salt. And so when you get a rejection back, and you immediately I do myself, have a knee-jerk reaction. Well, if it weren't for that one reviewer, well, it's not the reviewer. A reviewer can suggest rejection, but it's up to the editors, and we use our judgment and weigh those critiques based on our knowledge of the field, consult with our other editors in many cases to decide whether this is an objectionable criteria for rejection. So really understand those roles. So just I'll leave you with this idea that it's up to you. You've done all this work. It's up to you to really convince the editor that this is something important, it's appropriate for their journal, and it's appropriate for their audience. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move it to the Q&A in just a moment, but before we do, I'm going to share my screen. And I want to share some upcoming webinars with you all. So anybody who's joining today's call and is interested, we have a webinar happening in about 2 weeks on conducting independent research. So this would be a great fit for anybody who may not have institutional backing, or maybe as an institution without the funding. So this is a good way to learn some more there. In August, we're hosting a webinar about how to publish as a clinician. So again, that may be a good fit for some folks on the call today, as well as a webinar a week after that one on biotechnology publication. So it'll be a similar setup to today, but we're going to be focusing more specifically on biotech. As you move through the publishing process, I do encourage you to keep an eye on our Sage Information for Authors Hub. It's a dedicated space with author support and resources. You'll see more information that we've covered across our webinar program today, how to get published, answers to common questions, information about the version of your paper you could share. Basically anything you can ask about your manuscript will be covered here. I'll leave this on the screen just to flag that we do have an author newsletter. It is published quarterly. The next one will be going out shortly. You'll get free academic publishing resources, and you'll be the first to know about upcoming webinars like the one that you're attending today. So if you're enjoying this and you think this might be a good fit, I do encourage you to sign up for it. I'll leave the QR code here, but just note that you will receive a recording of, sorry, the slides that we've shared today. So you'll be able to access it directly. All right, so definitely feel free to send us any more questions you've got in the Q&A on your screen. But for my first question, Dr. Perry, I'd like to come to you first, if I may. Um, I'm curious if you could share any tips you have for early career researchers who are looking to publish their first research paper.
One is getting a lot of advice from colleagues or prior mentors about journal selection. And as Randolph mentioned, also realizing that critiques are there for their benefit during the review process and not to be dissuaded. And going back to my earlier comment, making certain that they, the best they can, to match their article, the scope, the topic, and prior matches the journal they're looking for. And the best way to do that is to look through the journal. You can look online at topics that are covered and what type of data is collected for those articles. Do they have micrographs? Do they have gels? Do they have numerical analysis? Is it very statistical? So matching that to their article, it will more likely have a successful submission process.
Dr. Nudo, is there anything from your end to add?
Yeah, I would say rely on colleagues, and if you have obviously your mentor will be reading your paper, but if you have other colleagues that you can send the paper to, and especially for early career people that are finishing work from their dissertation, perhaps most of us, even though we're senior and are busy, will try to take the time if it's in our area to critique a paper by a junior scientist. So don't be shy about reaching out to your colleagues about pre-reading a paper before it goes in. Again, I think there's usually a rush. You need to get the paper out the door so you can get credit for your dissertation, or you need to apply for a postdoc or some other position. So sometimes we rush that process, and I would take the time to make sure that that paper is done right upon first submission, and avoid headaches later down the road. And I think you'll have much better paper in the end.
Thank you very much for that. Um, and I'm wondering, Dr. Nudo, if I could pass this right back to you. I've got another question here. As a journal editor, what recurring issues do you notice in submissions? And I'm wondering, is there something you'd recommend that authors should keep this in mind preemptively to improve their chance of chance of acceptance, excuse me.
Yeah, I think in some of the things that I noted before, certainly highlighting the pointing out what the importance and novelty of the study is, but try to think about when you write your paper and you're reading it for the final time before you send it in. Try to think about how a reviewer will read this. It's very difficult to step out of your own space and your own niche and read this from an unbiased reviewer standpoint. But you've got to make the reviewer's job easy. And reviewers are busy people. So making things concise and transparent in the introduction and methods, and making sure that your figures are optimal. I mean, there's a psychological advantage to submitting a figure that looks very professional rather than a MATLAB screen dump. So make sure that you are putting your best foot forward, and allowing and really the bottom line is that you want the reviewers to review the science and not decipher what the importance of the results are, or deciphering complex figures that don't display the data as transparently as possible. So transparency is key, and I think that's becoming more and more important in all of the whole publishing world.
For sure, yes. Dr. Perry, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I want to follow up on what Randolph said earlier. The title and the abstract should be really clear as to why one would want to read the rest of the paper. If I read, because I read the title and the abstract, and then if I'm not clear, I look through even more of the paper. But the fact that I'm looking at more and more to find the conclusion of why I'd want to read this paper is not a good sign. So you want to have it right up front. And actually, what I tell students is that you can't, in the busy world we're in, you need to have the whole story within the title to lead people to look at the abstract, to lead people to look at the rest. So reviewers need to be interested in knowing everything about the paper.
George, I call this scientific clickbait.
Yeah, exactly. Even before there was clickbait, this was essential because during the time of current contents, the paper version, all you saw were the titles, and you decided based on that whether were going to proceed further.
That's great. Thank you very much. I think we've got time for one more question, if we may. And this has come up a handful of times across the entire webinar program. Rejection is very common in the field, conducting research, publishing, and even beyond that, tenures for grants, all of that. What tips do you have for an author or a potential author who's been rejected a few times? Anything from how do you handle it to maybe at what point do you pivot? Do you come up with a new paper topic? Anything like that. Dr. Perry, can I start with you in this one?
One of the ways to deal with rejection in journals is to already have an idea what journal you're going to submit it to if it gets rejected. Because the normal sequence, at least for me earlier in my career, is you get rejected and you're depressed for a couple of weeks. Okay, you don't know what to do. You should already have a plan in place for rejection because it's a possibility. So that's the first thing. Second part, fitting with Randolph, you should plan not to be rejected by doing everything to minimize the chance. But you heard in his case, he's only accepting 15%. Case of Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, it's about 48%, something like that. So your chance of being rejected is there, but it's not random. Same as citations, same as everything else. It's not in preparing to do the best you can to have it formatted properly, have an article interesting but not oversold. But even if you do everything right, you still can be rejected. So plan what you're going to do if it does get rejected.
Yeah,
That's my basic answer. I don't know what to say beyond that.
may I add to that? I just wanted to say that the one thing you should not do, and this is something I've seen too many times when papers get rejected and authors simply submit that same paper to another journal, hoping that it will get a different response. And it's amazing. You think that reviewers are idiosyncratic observers, and so you're going to get different kinds of criticism from different reviewers. But very often, most of the time, in fact, the same criticisms come up again and again. And so I've seen. So you really need to take the prior criticisms seriously and revamp your paper based on those criticisms as best you can before you submit somewhere else. So don't shortcut the process and hope that you get a different response. That's I think that's the definition of insanity when you expect a different result. But it's very likely that you'll get the similar comments the next time. So be prepared for those.
Yeah, and I want to add that along that line, it's important to make that even if you're submitting to another journal, you should address the comments you had from journal A when you go to journal B. And the other thing that's really worth the time is a point by point response and executing that with great care. For every comment, you need to have a separate document that describes what you did, and not insult the reviewer. Remember, they're going to see it again. And most reviewers are very conscientious, even if they get screwed up and confused. It's probably because your paper is confusing. So you need to address their comment and make it clear, more transparent.
Very helpful. Thank you very much. I think with that, I'm very happy we're able to wrap up today's webinar. I want to thank everybody for joining, for being part of today's call. Thank you so much to everyone who took the time to come out today. Whoever is attending live, just note that you'll receive an email from me in about the next week or so with follow-up resources. So a link to the recording, a link to the slides, all of that. You'll also receive immediately a certificate of attendance. So thank you for attending. And of course, a huge thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Alyssa, Hemi, Dr. Perry, Dr. Nudo for all of your expertise today. It was great having you all on the call. Thank you to everybody joining, and we hope to see you in a future webinar. Take care.